podcast starts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Now the Podcast Starts, a show which talks about horror, cinema and anything related that takes the interest of my wonderful co-hosts or myself. I'm TD Velasquez, but you can call me Dan in Greater Manchester, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by...
Stella Gaynor, also in Manchester.
And also...
Kirsty in Shropshire.
That's fantastic. It's been a couple of weeks since we've all been together on the podcast, and this week we're going to be talking about the movies that frightened us the most. But before we get into that main discussion, let's just take a moment to catch up. How are you both doing?
I'm good.
Good, yeah, good, thanks.
Wonderful. Have we got any news or things that are making us happy from either the world of horror or just the world of life in general?
I'm very happy to hear that there's a Scream 5 in the making.
Yes!
Hooray!
Yes, I was delighted to hear that, yeah. I think the news has been around for a few weeks, but somehow I've missed it.
Yeah.
And I was really pleased when I heard that, because obviously the previous 4 Scream films, which we've touched on in this podcast before, Stella, because I know that you're very, very fond of Scream.
I am.
And the previous 4 were all directed by Wes Craven, who sadly passed away 5 years ago. So who's going to direct the new one? Well, I'm afraid I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but it's the writing and directing team behind Ready or Not, which was one of my favourite horror movies of last year. And I think it's a really good fit for it, because that movie is funny, ingenious, and extremely violent. So
I think it bodes well, I think. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, and also they've confirmed that Neve Campbell and David Arquette are back as well. Yeah. No confirmation yet on Courtney Cox, but I'm crossing my fingers for that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So that's a great piece of news. Even when film production actually restarts safely, that's something to look forward to. How about you, Kirsty? How's life and things?
I've got a couple of things to talk about. One horror, one not. Well, it might be horror. I don't know yet. There has been some kind of gentle building speculation on the interwebs that Hannibal might be being primed for a 4th season on Netflix. Netflix in the US now have, I understand, the rights, or certainly kind of showing seasons 1 to 3. And Brian Fuller, the creator, and kind of places like Nerdist are together with Netflix doing kind of things like online rewatch parties and things like that. So the fan community of Hannibals, who are affectionately known as Fannibals, which of course I am one, are getting quite excited. Yes, about quite excited about the prospect of a 4th season. So I'm keeping an eye on that. The other potential horror news is that my husband, Sven, has always been a bearded person, and his beard is very large at this point, obviously because of the restrictions around lockdown, and so he's decided, this has been brewing for a while, that he's going to shave it all off for charity. He's doing it to raise money for NHS charities together, Stonewall, and also Black Lives Matter UK. So Dan, can you, if I share the link, can you share it via our Twitter? So if anybody wants to donate, they can do. There was also a video where you will see the length of my husband's beard currently. So the potential horror is I've never actually seen his chin in 15 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, exactly. So,
so who knows what's under there?
Yeah.
I did see that Sven had written that on the blurb, but I thought that was a joke. I thought you must have seen it at some point.
No, genuinely. There's always been some level of beard upon his lower face. So I've never seen him clean shaven, so that'll be interesting.
That's amazing.
That's...
Can we run a book on what we think's under there? Like 10 to 1, a tattoo, 50 to 1, a smaller face, things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it certainly is going to all be documented and shared on social media, the whole removal. And he's also taking requests of, kind of kind of beard or moustache styles, sort of in the interim as he's taking it down to a clean face.
Like a comedy beard album, I guess.
Yes, yeah. So like handlebar moustache, for example.
Sideys.
He has already though ruled out any, the possibility of him doing a Hitler.
Yeah, well,
that's definitely not happening.
I was going to suggest that, but
no. He's vetoed that already.
Cool.
So it's going to be filmed, the actual de-bearding.
Yeah.
So I hope that someone, possibly me, is going to be able to turn the footage upside down and dub on the Rolling Stones music, so it kind of looks like the start of Full Metal Jacket, where they're all having their heads shaved.
Yep, Dan, the job is yours, mate.
Yes, I think I volunteered for that one, haven't I?
You can have the permission to just immediately lift that footage and then add that music.
Right. Okay, wonderful. No, that's a great bit of news, like you say. There's a potential bit of horror there, but a wonderful set of causes that he's chosen.
Yeah.
And we'll put that out on our Twitter because it's well worth supporting. Oh, nice one, Kirsty.
Thank you.
All in all, a good bit of news for the week. Quite exciting. So that means now it's time for us to steel ourselves and confront the most frightening films we've ever seen.
Oof.
And we're going to discuss them. Obviously, all three of us have chosen 2 films each. We've had to narrow it down to the 2 most frightening films, which has been quite difficult for me, and I'm sure it was difficult for you too. And we're going to discuss them in order of the ages that we were when we watched them, because I'm interested in discussing how much of an effect one's memory of being scared when one was at a younger age kind of follows through. And therefore, for that reason, we're going to start with Stella's choice, which is a film that I'm pretty sure that Kirsty and I also will have seen at the same time.
Yeah.
So, Stella, take it away.
Right then, Ghost Watch. So.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Ghost Watch is, first of all, I was very young. I was 11, I think. And it was a BBC, essentially made-for-TV movie in the style of a mockumentary. So they were going to sit outside Britain's most haunted house, and they had Craig Charles outside the house with the camera team going in with Sarah Green and Michael Parkinson in the studio. So it felt a bit crime-watchy as well.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, the BBC did advertise it as a drama, and it was also advertised on the front cover of the Radio Times that week that it was a drama. But when I sat down to watch it that night, because it was on Halloween night that year, and I didn't see the opening, that when the introduction to a programme, and now BBC One starts EastEnders or whatever it is, I missed that introduction, so I turned it on at, say, maybe 9:05 when the programme had already started, not really knowing that what I was watching was a piece of fiction. Anyway, so I sits down to watch it, and off it goes, and it's got these trusted presenters on it. I used to watch Sarah Green on Blue Peter, and
all the presenters are playing themselves.
Yeah. So there was no actors in there as such, apart from, well, I guess the family were actors. Anyway, so I was totally sucked in, completely believed it. The family are telling everyone, well, these are the happenings we've had in the house. The little girls have been woken up with scratches, and they had some CCTV footage from inside the house of the pipes being clanged and the girls jumping out of bed because their bedside lamp exploded. And it's going on and on and on and on and on. And Michael Parkinson sat there basically going, nah, that's not happening. And the more it goes on, the more it started to think that you were seeing things that weren't actually there. So the bit that I remember the most sticking in my head was they show a piece of footage, film, CCTV reel from the house with the girls in bed. And as the girls turn their lights off, you can clearly see a figure by the curtain. And in the studio, Michael Parkinson and the doctor, I forget the doctor's name.
The doctor's called, she's played by an actress called Gillian Bevan, who has more recently been on stage in Manchester, so I know some people who know her slightly. And, she's called Dr. Lynn Pascoe.
Lynn Pascoe, there we go. So anyway, so they're watching this video footage of the girls going to bed. The girls get in bed, these two young girls in the one bedroom. They turn off their bedroom light, and there's clearly a figure stood by the curtains. So the doctor says, "Oh, there's a figure there. Can we watch that back?" And they roll the tape back, and you watch it again, and the figure's gone. So it's doing a very, very good job for the audience going, "Well, was that really there? Did I actually see that?" Sure. And so the show continues, and it escalates, and live things start happening. I'm doing air quotes with my fingers, even though you can't see them. More and more live things starts happening. It gets worse and worse. The tension ramps up. Mr. Pipes appears in the studio behind the doctor's head as she plays a tape. And everything just goes wild. Sarah Green gets dragged into a cupboard. Michael Parkinson's wandering around like a Yorkshireman possessed at the end. And it's a national seance over the airwaves. And then all the studio starts blowing up, doesn't it? Like all the lights break and the lights go off. And then it just ends. And I just sat there going, "What the
podcast
is that?" So scared. I was so scared. Now, I was 11 at the time, and I was probably shouldn't have been watching it because I'm sure it was on after 9 o'clock. And I did watch it again.
It was on at 9.
At 9, right. So no, I shouldn't have been watching it, should I? Let's be honest. I did watch it again when I was older, in my early 20s, thinking, does this still stand up? And it definitely does. And I realised that when I rewatched it, there was lots of stuff that I missed. So when I watched it the first time round, I didn't notice Mr. Pipes in the studio.
Yeah.
And I also didn't really get that the end of it was saying, this is a nationwide seance now. You know, the ghost has come through the threshold of the television and now it's in your house too. I didn't really see that when I was a kid. But when on rewatching it, I was like, well, yeah, I'd have been, in hospital. And when I watched it when I was older, I was like, gosh, there's even more to this than I originally saw. And interestingly, the BBC, because they got in trouble and they had to have a press conference the next day, and they were on Kilroy as well, which was hilarious. The producer was on Kilroy defending himself or herself.
Right.
But the BBC have never repeated it. They've never shown it again, and it was only released on DVD not that long ago, because the BBC were just like, oh, right, yeah, back up. We got in trouble off that. We're not going to do anything like that again. But nobody had seen that sort of TV almost found footage type stuff before, and certainly not on television. And then since then it sparked loads of stuff like Most Haunted and whatnot. But yeah, absolutely pooed my pants. I did when I watched that, and it's still scary now. I'm still not all right with it, for sure.
And when you watch it now, do you feel that you are scared by what you are seeing now, or it's the memory of how scared you were at 11 coming back?
It's definitely a little bit of both, because the horror sequences of Mr. Pipes stood by the window, and then when there's all the cats meowling, because didn't Mr. Pipes commit suicide and then get eaten by cats? Wasn't that the story?
Yes, yeah.
So all the
backstory is brilliant in it.
The backstory is fabulous. But again, when I was 11, I didn't really notice any of that. It was just, there's a ghost on the TV.
Right.
So yeah, the mewing of all the cats near the end, and say Mr. Pipes by the curtain, still definitely give me the shivers now. And so now that I understand more of the story and more of the backstory, I think it still stands up, and still I find it an uncomfortable watch because it's so well put together. Some of the script's a bit clunky, but that's 1992 for you. But yeah.
Yeah.
So did you guys watch it too?
I certainly watched it on transmission and taped it. Yeah. Kirsty, did you see it when it was first on?
Yeah, I saw it when it was live. I didn't tape it. I think principally because I didn't really have a sense of how important it was going to become, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think,
course,
Dan, did you have a copy? You had a copy.
I did, but
you did, yeah.
What happened was I taped it at the time, and then lent it to a friend who shall not be named. It was you, Stella.
I know.
And never got it back. So in 2002, when the BFI released the DVD of it, I bought that. You and I were at uni, Kirsty, and I remember lending it to you.
Yeah.
I think you watched it with your household.
Yeah.
Did Kirsty give it back to you?
I did.
Yes, I still have it. I have it now.
Yeah.
And
You can watch it on YouTube.
it kind of comes and goes from YouTube.
Right.
I think that the BBC might take it down.
It's all available on Learning on Screen on the box of broadcasts. Yeah. It's on there as well.
Oh right, I don't even know what that is, to be honest.
We do, don't we, Stella?
Yeah, we do. It's an archive of
resource.
TV stuff that's for educational purposes, but yeah, it's all on there. And I watched it again on that recently, and still was like, nope.
All right, well, fair enough. Yeah, I think it's been released by the BBC now. Finally, yeah. I think that the DVD release that is available now is actually released by the BBC, so they have started to acknowledge it. And also, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago there was a short-lived kind of stream. It wasn't a streaming service; it was a website called the BBC Store where you could buy BBC things. It was like the BBC equivalent of iTunes, basically. You could buy programs downloaded, and it was available on there together with a documentary called Ghost Watch Behind the
Curtain, yeah.
Which, unfortunately, the BBC Store was a massive flop and was shut down within about a year, I think. And Ghost Watch Behind the Curtains has become completely unavailable because it was a low-budget kind of crowd-funded documentary, and they only had the ability to strike so many physical copies of it, and there's nowhere that's streaming it now. But I have seen it, and it's really interesting. And you can buy a book called The Transcript. I think that the people who made it found it cheaper, rather than trying to re-release the DVD or get it produced again. They just released a book which is literally the content of the DVD transcribed.
Right.
So I got that and read it, and then I found a copy of the thing. So that's really interesting, and I'm kind of hopeful that maybe both of those things will turn up on BritBox.
Yeah, that'd be good. I mean, it's had the sort of same effect or problem, if you want to call it a problem, as War of the Worlds on the radio, because people with that they missed the beginning, saying this is a fiction, because they're switching over from one radio channel to the next, and then they're switching on sort of 10 minutes in and going, oh, this is a news report. And if you're not used to this idea of, well, the mockumentary, or making it look like it's real, and people 11-year-old me just get taken in. And even having the phone in on it and stuff, it was such a common and trusted TV formatted trope that
they used a real phone number as well.
Yeah.
That it's the same phone number that Going Live used.
811-8181, was it that?
Yes, it was. And they had to have people manning the phone line.
Yeah.
In case people used it, which they obviously did. And the people on the other end of the phone line just said, "Hello, the TV program is a fiction, but if you want to talk to me about your ghost experiences, I'll listen." They got thousands of calls like that, apparently.
Oh, it was just great.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, it was very nearly one of my choices. I think it's one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. Yeah. And I still watch it again quite regularly. I think I only saw it a couple of years ago last. Go on, Kirsty.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of develop Stella's point about the whole kind of, connection between Ghostwatch and War of the Worlds. And I think it's been interesting in, kind of podcasting, how that kind of strategy for horror podcasting has become a kind of a thing, particularly in the kind of post-serial kind of era. So shows like, or podcasts like Limetown and Tanis do the same thing, but they don't, or at least sort of Tanis definitely doesn't kind of go, hey, we're fiction. It presents itself very, very seriously, and uses a lot of kind of real world contact points in terms of, here are some things that have actually happened, some people who actually exist, and then plugs the story into that. Which, kind of really, can kind of heighten that sense of it sort of being real and kind of and therefore scary. So
it gives it the authenticity that makes you buy into it completely, and then there you are, you're too scared to get up to go for a wee in the middle of the night.
I mean, I haven't heard those podcasts, but I did listen to a podcast called The Message, which did that. Yeah. It took me 3 or 4 episodes to work out that it wasn't real.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no, the message is very
I'm
simple.
going to write that down.
Yeah, it's just one season of the message, but it's very effectively done, I think. But yeah, Lime 10 and Tanis are definitely. Tanis is more expansive, and I think Lime 10's got 2 seasons at the moment.
Okay,
interesting.
I do think that Ghostwatch is a great example of something which, in a way, you kind of have to do with ghost stories to make them most effective, is strip away as much of a sense of the artifice and a sense of the unreal as possible. And going back to pre-technological media, even writers of ghost stories like M.R. James would have to do that by saying, this is not something that they'd have a preface where the character would say that I discovered this story in some papers when I was searching the office of a professor friend or whatever. Just something to kind of bring it a bit more near to factual reality rather than fiction. And Ghostwatch is a great example of that. But I think the genre does need that, which is why it's really good to know that the people are continuing to try and engage different mediums into that. And create that kind of effect. I would say that for anyone who's not seen Ghostwatch, it's one of the greatest example of context being crucial. I think you've got to understand that it was made when it was. You've got to have a certain amount of understanding of what TV was like in 1992.
Yeah.
Because although it is a film, as we've said, it's like a TV movie, it was made as part of a strand of BBC One dramas called Screen One. They were all essentially movies that would just happen to be on TV on a Sunday night. But Ghostwatch obviously is one of those, but it goes out of its way to imitate factual TV broadcast, which, had it been made by less committed or less intelligent people, it might not have bothered to do simple things like not be shot on film. Not be made in a studio, not employ. It might have done things like cast actors as the presenters instead of just getting presenters, things like that. So I think you've got to kind of understand that to get the most out of it. I did see it a few years ago at a screening with an audience, and the writer Stephen Volt was present, and he had to kind of do that, put it into its context. And I think that it's got to be fully in context for you to even potentially be frightened by it. I think if you don't have the correct contextual understanding of it, it might just seem strange. Because TV itself has changed so much ever since.
There's the odd bit of footage that was on YouTube. There's also a Charlie Brooker sort of breakdown of Ghostwatch when he did How TV Ruined Your Life in that series that he did.
Yes.
And he showed on that, and you can find his clip about Ghostwatch on YouTube, and he talked about how when the producers were on Kilroy that week. Kilroy was a chat show, terrible thing that was on. The audience member in Kilroy who was having a go at them about Ghostwatch, they were saying something along the lines of, "You deliberately set out to trick the audience," and it's like, did they? They did tell you it was a drama. Michael Parkinson was on the cover of Radio Times going, "Ooh, ghosts."
It was like a specially created Radio Times cover shot. I remember that really well. I think it's a funny question about. I don't think they intended it to be a hox.
Hoax, the word hoax.
I wonder how much of its effectiveness is down to the fact that some people did think it was real, like you did.
I definitely did.
I was kind of... I have this ability to be credulous, so I kind of knew it wasn't real, but was wishing it was. And I think by 10 minutes into it, I was just focused on it, and I was in there. And then when the credits came up at the end, I remember that I watched it with my mum and dad, and they thought it was real.
Right.
Or maybe they didn't, but they thought it was tricking them or something. But I do remember that when the credits came up at the end, they were both disgusted. It's like, that was rubbish. And
Disgusted.
yeah, and I think that's a lot of the attitude.
Do you remember it was all over the newspapers?
Yeah.
It was like the front page news on loads of the red tops, wasn't it, the next day? BBC
Right.
Hoax Nation.
I do
Calm
remember,
down.
like, on Monday morning going to school and on the school bus and expecting everybody to be talking about it. And it's like, guys, did you see Sarah Green die on TV on Saturday night? And as I remember, none of them had watched it. They were all talking about The Big Breakfast instead, which had also just started. The Channel 4 morning programme with Chris Evans. So, not that Chris
Also
Evans.
quality TV, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say that it's a great text to check out. I can't really recommend whether or not I think people will find it frightening, because I think that context is so important. I have to say that, for instance, when I showed it to my nephew a few years later in about 1997, I provided fake context for him. I said, this is a real documentary which I taped a few years ago. It's very interesting. And as he watched it, he got more and more alarmed and kept saying at repeated points, all right, I don't want to see any more, can we stop now? And I would say, lying through my teeth, no, it's all right, I've seen it before, nothing scary happens.
How old was the nephew?
Probably about 8. So,
Dan.
yeah, so I'll take this moment to apologise to Sam on the air. But at the end, when the credits came up and it said written by Stephen Volk, he went, oh, what?
Oh.
He was so relieved and also a little bit disappointed in a way that it was not real. So there we go, that's Ghost Watch. I think it's a fascinating piece of work which we could talk about for ages, but we've got other films to get through. So we'll move on to your first choice then, Kirsty.
Mm-hmm. Event Horizon.
From just a few years later in the 90s, 1997's Event Horizon.
Yes.
So, Kirsty, how did you see this movie?
Oh, okay. So I think the thing to note about this one is that I was 17. So you can work out how old I am.
Right.
It was out in 97. And I saw it at the cinema. I had some free tickets. So I took my boyfriend at the time to see Event Horizon. I was also at the time staying at my mother's house sitting for her, and she was off in some far-flung place. So I was in a strange house alone, and I decided that it was a good idea to go to see a film where the tagline was infinite space, infinite terror.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I went to see Event Horizon, and I was also at the time working in a cinema, the same cinema that I saw it in. And a couple of weeks later, we actually got Event Horizon in. And so I had the pleasure of sort of having to watch it for work repeatedly.
Right.
So I have to say, I probably saw it in that kind of in the time it came out, probably about 15 to 20 times.
Wow.
And I have not seen it since.
Probably don't need to.
Yeah,
probably good.
No. So, so Event Horizon is one of those films that directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Lots of people sort of regard it as being his finest film because, the rest of his films have not been critically well received. It didn't do terribly well at the time it came out. It was made for a budget of about 60 million, I think, at the time. And only made about just under half that back, and part of that apparently was to do with the fact they had to kind of bump the release of it because Paramount realised that Titanic was not going to be finished in time. James Cameron, so they bumped it into the cinema earlier than Anderson wanted it. So apparently the initial cut is much longer than the one that was put into cinemas. Well, the basic concept is it's a sci-fi horror. Lawrence Fishburne, bless him, is leading a kind of rescue mission to somewhere near Neptune to recover a spaceship with some, kind of super, revolutionary space travel technology has disappeared and reappeared again, sort of, I think 7 or 8 years after its disappearance. And so they have to go and recover the craft. He takes with him Dr. Weir, played by Sam Neill. Who's responsible for the technology that kind of drives this revolutionary, kind of mode or way of travelling across large parts of space. Anyway, they arrive there, and of course, terrible things have happened aboard the ship, which is called the Event Horizon, hence the title. And yes, everything is very, very bad from that point onwards.
Just very bad.
The Fishburne's crew is kind of numerous, so that there can be creative and inventive ways for people to die throughout the course of the film. It's very much a kind of haunted house narrative, but in space. And part of the reason why I just... Oh, God.
Just come on, Kirsty. Do it with us.
Okay, so again, this is where it kind of gets a kind of personal thing. Is there's quite a lot of... eyes are quite important in terms of the kind of body horror of the film, and I really don't like eyes or anything happening to eyes, and so the whole sort of third act relies quite a lot on people doing things to their eyes. And there's also somebody who, because this is, again, I'm not one of those people who go, oh yeah, space, it'd be lovely to go there. No. So somebody
be awful.
Clearly would be awful. So somebody in an airlock, that's also really
like
slow. Oh
stuff.
Gosh, terrible. Not nice. It's kind of, as a film, sort of underpinned by the idea that the kind of the Event Horizon has somehow travelled to hell and come back with some kind of demonic, hellish kind of presence that feeds on the kind of emotional, psychological demons of each of the individual crew members. So there's a lot of it which is quite hypnotic and dreamlike. These visions that the ship creates for the crew are quite terrifying. There is also... the use of when they arrive on the ship, they find transmissions from the original crew.
Oh, the scary SOS type thing.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a tape that they get to see, and I've just, in my notes as I was preparing for this morning, I've just put horror orgies. So in that there are kind of dismemberments, cannibalism, all of that kind of stuff going on. But I remember being particularly affected at the time, the way in which that stuff is displayed on screen, in that you get very, very quick cuts of it. It feels almost subliminal, whereas when you watch it, you don't think to yourself, oh yeah, I've seen that, and I can recall that shot, I remember exactly what I've seen. It kind of, you go, I know I've seen it, but my brain has now just stored it somewhere in my subconscious for it to be, kind of brought out in, kind of dreams or nightmares later on.
In the middle of the night when you're trying to go to the toilet. I need a wee.
Oh, So having said that, there is... The one of the things that I found really interesting about the film and quite beguiling about it is I think it's actually quite a beautiful film. There are lots of really kind of careful consideration into how the ships are the Event Horizon itself. So that was apparently the set design for that was based on Notre Dame Cathedral. There's lots of kind of religious symbolism in
the ship itself is cruciform, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and there's, kind of lots of ideas about, kind of sacrifice, and so kind of ways in which it can be kind of read with a kind of Christian subtext, and obviously the idea of hell is in there. And one of the things that I remember when I was working at the cinema and watching the film is that I was sometimes in the projection room, watching it coming off, the film being projected, and watching the actual film, because it was old, obviously, the actual reel kind of coming off the projector. And one time I watched it, I became aware that actually there's something really hypnotic in the way that the scenes are sequenced, in terms of being kind of patterns of red, green, blue, as they kind of, as the sort of scenes came off the projector onto the reel. And so that's, I think, when I watched it the first couple of times, I wasn't aware of that kind of pattern being developed, but as I was obviously the other side of the projector, was able to see that happening. So that kind of intrigued me. There's a moment in the film that also kind of speaks to the aesthetics. It's Lawrence Fishburne, iconic line. He says something like to another character, "Have you ever seen fire in zero gravity? It's beautiful." And then cue some, at the time were quite, convincing special effects, or visual effects rather, of a man on fire in zero gravity. So the ending of the film as well, not to spoil it, kind of has one of those endings which I'm going to come back to when we talk about Descent, where you don't get that sense of the happy ending, or at least it's a bit ambiguous.
Yes.
So I like horror stays with me, I think, more when there's a more dour, downbeat ending. So the end of Ghostwatch, everything's terrible. So that, because I think the final note in horror films is always really important.
Yeah.
And that sense of, in many films, the sun comes up, it's a new dawn, and, the final girl walks out of whatever wilderness she's been in, and she gets, it's fine. But where that sense of it, oh no, it's not, is kind of like once you've been through an ordeal with a film, to have that sense of, oh, it's not actually over, but we're letting you out anyway. You've just got to sit with that, kind of sense of lack of equilibrium restored. I always found really effective. So, so it's has now become a kind of a cult film, despite it not being terribly well received at the time. And I understand that there's a television show in development.
All right.
This is really Last year they announced that it was in development. So where it is at the moment, I don't quite know. Yeah. And how long it might take to get to our screens, I don't know. But I would certainly be interested in revisiting the Event Horizon in a television form.
I think it would be interesting to see a long form version of Event Horizon, because, as you said, Kirsty, the original film was meant to be much longer, and they don't have the option of releasing an extended version of the film, because the original footage was not saved. Yeah. Everything that was excised. So, and it's a really short and sharp movie. It's only, I think it is 90 minutes.
Yeah, although it feels much longer when you're watching.
It does.
Right. Wow. I do remember being I've seen it twice, and I was very disturbed the first time. The second time I was more kind of focusing on Sam Neill's ham, which is probably not slightly fair, but but I agree entirely that it's a beautiful film. There's abundant disturbing ideas in it. Oh, I also at one point on VHS, which is the last time I watched it, I attempted to slow down and frame by frame through the weird hell scenes.
Horror orgies.
I just wanted to see what was there. To be honest, it didn't make it much clearer.
No.
Slowing it down, especially in VHS quality. But yeah, I'll tell you what though, there are things about that movie that have stayed with me, even though I've not actually seen it for so long. I can hear the music still. I remember finding the opening, scroll at the start of the film, which sets up the backstory.
Yeah.
Just that is quite disturbing. It says, the Event Horizon went missing just beyond the 8th planet, Neptune. It is the worst space disaster on record.
Yeah.
Things like that. And Fishburne is great.
He is.
He's always good, though.
Yeah.
And I think it's possibly the first of Sean Pertwee's many appearances in a horror film. I don't think there's an earlier one. So, welcome, Sean. We'll probably talk about him some more.
There's a guy that I know through work, Dr. Dr. Sheldon Hall, who works as a lecturer at the Sheffield Hallam University.
Yes, he did.
Yes, we know him too.
He's in it.
Yes,
we know that.
You know that?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just remembered just now. I was like, Sheldon's in it.
Yeah, no,
I didn't know you knew
lecturer.
Sheldon.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
Yes.
was our lecturer, and he used to have a photo because he played one of the crew of the Event Horizon.
Yeah.
So in theory, you see him in the Hell flashbacks.
Yeah.
Maybe actually that was really why I slowed it down and frame
Yeah,
by frame because I was
gonna
trying to
ask,
find
was it?
Sheldon.
Try and get a gander at Sheldon.
I couldn't really see him, to be honest. But there was like a photo of him in the uniform with the whole cast of the crew of the Event Horizon in their uniforms, and that was on the wall of his office.
It's in his office, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so... bless him, good old Sheldon.
I do like
no
Sheldon.
contact.
I see him fairly frequently now. So I do conferences at Hallam, horror conferences there.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, he doesn't go on about his Event Horizon starring role very much, but it always amuses me.
Yeah, no, he was agreeably bashful about it, bless him. I had some good chats with him in the university refectory over the years. He's a good one.
He is.
All right, so I guess that means it's my turn.
It is.
So the film I'm going to choose is The Blair Witch Project, which I saw at the cinema in 1999. And it
You can do this, Dan.
Yeah.
well, yeah.
It's like you gird yourself.
So, indeed. I think it connects with Stella's choice because the main thing I remember thinking is this is the nearest a film has come to making me feel like Ghostwatch made me feel.
Interesting.
And because it's a very similar format, really. So the Blair Witch Project, in case any listeners are unfamiliar with it, is what we now call a found footage horror movie, and it's essentially the story is that 3 film students went out to make a documentary in the woods around Burkittsville, which is a fictional part of America. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what state it's meant to be in. Maybe, it's Maryland, I think. And they went looking for this legendary witch, the Blair Witch, which has been associated with various incidents over the years. They disappear into the woods and are never seen again. But as the disturbing opening backstory crawl that comes up on the screen says, a year later, their footage was found. And what you watch is an assembly of highlights, essentially, of the footage they shot. It doesn't tell you who's supposed to have assembled it, but it's really interesting because it's what they were trying to make was a documentary in theory. So in a way you watch it in that spirit, and the context of that is given to you by the opening scene setting blurb. However, unlike Ghostwatch, Blair Witch Project doesn't really have the ability to be accidentally mistaken for a real documentary, although it was in a very early stage of its release, because it had a website that purported that it was a factual event. The producers did things like they altered the IMDb biographies of all the actors in it who appeared under their own names, and the IMDb biographies said that they were now missing and things like that. So, and certainly when the film was premiered at Cannes, I think a lot of the people who saw it for the very first time, not knowing what it was, thought that it was real, and it was the kind of shock of that and the word of mouth of that was really powerful in raising the profile of the movie. But I think by the time it got to the UK, I think obviously most people knew that it was a horror movie.
Yeah, we knew by the time it got here.
And I think there was a certain amount of disdain that it was trying to be a horror movie, but it didn't look or feel anything like a horror movie. And in fact, in that screening where I saw it in a double bill on a Sunday night, I think. A double bill with John Carpenter's Vampires, the other great horror movie to come out in late 1999. And it was absolutely packed. in this cinema, the Roxy in Oldham. It was completely
Oh, the
loaded with
Roxy.
people. Yeah. But it was not hugely well received. In fact, I remember the most distinct thing I remember from that night, apart from the film itself, was the fact that there was one guy sitting a few rows in front of me who halfway through the film got up, walked to the middle of the auditorium, made V signs at the screen and left.
Well, he really needs to learn how to form an opinion.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, I think he knew exactly what he thought. I think he was being pretty unabashed. But I was terrified and loved it, and spent a good part of the rest of the night, and in fact the next few years, talking with different friends about different reactions to it, because it is a movie that provoked positive and negative reactions very strongly. And I think the thing which has made it work for me is that I felt that it was like Ghostwatch, using the medium to create a reality that was subtle enough and free enough of artifice that I could slip into it and then really feel the escalating levels of panic that the characters on screen felt. And the quality of the performances in the film is something which has been debated over the years, but I remember feeling that I was completely convinced by them. You know, the actors in the movie were not working from a script. It was essentially improvised. They were just given kind of story beats they had to stick to. And throughout the movie, as these characters wander into the woods and get more and more lost, the performances become edgier, and the mood of the characters, the interactions become more frayed, and the level of anxiety starts to ramp up. And I remember really feeling that, and the movie builds up to an incredible climax, I think. And again, loads of people were disappointed that you didn't see certain things that you might have been expecting to see in a regular horror movie. You know, there wasn't a visual monster that turned up at the end.
We don't see the witch, do we?
Well, I was trying to avoid saying that explicitly, but yes.
Or maybe you do. Who knows?
Well, but whether you see it or not is not the point. The point is whether or not it's really there off camera, or if something else is going on. You know, if it's about hysteria and things like that, because a lot of the movie can be read as basically being a drama of hysteria in which characters who are isolated and lose hope start to become prey to their own imaginations and things, and how that affects them. So therefore I think you could possibly argue that a lot of what happens maybe in their minds, obviously they do things like they come on a house which they believe is from one of the stories of the witch, and that's where the climax of the movie ends. But whether it really was, or whether it's just a random building that they found. Having said that, you do see certain things in the house, don't you? I'm just thinking back to it. So I've not watched the movie for 15 years, I think. I did watch it again, I think at least twice. Once when it was on TV and once on DVD. And I loved it both times. What I actually loved even more was it has one of the best companion pieces of any movie, which is another spoof documentary that they made called The Curse of the Blair Witch, I think, which is a more conventional made-for-TV kind of talking heads documentary about the legends that are supposedly associated with the Blair Witch. And so that's kind of entirely the backstory for the movie. And that's really chilling in its kind of understated way. And like Ghostwatch, it's very, very accurate in the way that it apes kind of sensationalist TV documentary styles of the late 90s. Yes, that's all that I feel like I want to say off the top of my head about the Blair Witch Project. But I I don't think there's any other movie which has gone that far in kind of stripping away the artifice to enhance the fear. And I still find it enjoyable as a movie, which is why I went back and watched it again. Because, you know, the early scenes of the movie, which are like the comedy, almost comedy scenes of the characters setting up for their trip out into the woods and things, there's quite a lot of charming, quiet character moments in there. There's the scenes where you get to see sections of the documentary they aimed to make, because one of the quite effective devices that the movie takes is that most of the movie is composed of the video footage of them just filming themselves as they go into the woods, which they wanted to use as kind of B-roll, but also every now and then they'd stop and set up their film camera and shoot some black and white film footage interviewing a local or something like that, or filling in a bit of the backstory. So we keep cutting to those things, and that's really nice. You know, there's a world set up that's explored really wonderfully and gently, and so therefore I do find it entertaining to go back to. Because I love ghost stories, and basically I think it's a great ghost story. That's the appeal there. Would either of you like to say anything about that movie?
Well, I love it. It's definitely one of my all-time favourite horror movies. When I saw it, the information had already got over here that it wasn't real. But I went to go and watch it at the cinema, thoroughly enjoyed the experience, because I think for me, and I guess maybe for lots of people, I'd not seen anything like that before at all. All of the talking to the camera and switching between cameras, and you know, it seeming very rough and ready. I'd never seen anything like that, and it was completely new to me. And certainly myself and my friends who went to see it that night, you know, we couldn't stop talking about it for days, for weeks afterwards. And as soon as I could get a copy at home to have and to own and to keep watching and rewatching, I did, and I've seen it many, many times. And my husband has seen it once and has absolutely point blank refused to ever watch it again. So, you know, and he didn't watch it until a good 10 years after its release, and he was like, yeah, I'm not watching that again. And I think it was on TV not long ago, really, a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh look, Blair Witch is on, and he's like, no, we're not having that. So I think it definitely absolutely does stand up and work as a really good scary horror movie.
Oh, nice. I'm really glad to see that. And I've just had the thought as well that it works as a kind of period piece, possibly, I think.
No, absolutely.
Unlike Ghostwatch, where you have to have a strong knowledge of the context to really appreciate it, Blair Witch Project was kind of already a period piece when it came out, because the footage is supposed to date from 1994, isn't it? And the text at the start of the movie tells you that straight away. So the whole thing is like a dusty archive document, and it's a dusty archive document about, you know, dusty legends and vague remembrances. So that's kind of appropriate to it.
And I think in terms as well about with the context is you've also got that sense of, you know, it fits absolutely perfectly in that time, because it's the time that, you know, kind of video technology gets, or the kind of prosumer kind of end of the market gets high quality enough to be able to kind of do that kind of thing for and make it suitable for a big audience. And you know, and you know, it was so perfectly timed in terms of the use of the internet for marketing, and that kind of question of the, you know, the kind of veracity of it. You know, it just seems, I mean, I think it's a great horror film, and you know, it kind of, but it exists in this very, very particular point, doesn't it, in kind of cinema history of that, you know, kind of the way in which kind of low budget filmmaking can provide something slightly different than mainstream filmmaking. I think, yeah. For me, there's two moments that I think really, I remember that stand out for me in recalling the film. And there's a bit early on in one of the kind of early montages when they're talking to the people of Burkittsville about their legends. And I think it's like a parent, I'm not sure if it's a mother or a father, holding a child.
Yes.
Oh, who, as they're telling the story, the child just goes to pieces in a way that seems completely genuine and kind of very, there's something kind of very visceral about that, the kind of the response that the child has, where it's just kind of sets up the film as this is going to be terrible. And the very final shot, which okay, fair enough, as you alluded to, we don't see necessarily anything and we don't get an answer to actually what's happening, but the way in which the kind of final shot resolves the question of the kind of some of those stories, and then just leaves it there, I just thought it's such a kind of a brave ending, not to offer more resolution, and just to kind of leave it hanging on a really powerful image, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'd just like to say, in addition to the documentary The Curse of the Blair Witch, another way in which the movie extended its legend while still refusing to give clear answers about anything was a wonderful book that was released called The Blair Witch Project, a dossier, which came out at the same time as the movie or just after. And I remember reading that. And again, that's just exploring the backstory largely. But it's a fascinating, chilling... just excavation of the things that have happened around the legend and all the stuff about Rustin Parr and that kind of thing. And it's great, and all that stuff that's kind of hung around it just enhances the film, really, I think. It's a shame that they don't seem to have found a way to extend it further into any further films, but I think maybe that's... I mean, I haven't seen... I think there are 2 sequels.
There's 2, yeah.
I haven't seen either of them, and I don't really want to. And I think maybe I'd be interested in something like a book or something that kind of extends the backstory or just explores it in a new way. But I'm not sure there's a lot of potential for kind of new cinematic stories to connect onto it. But as a standalone piece of work, I think I remember it being wonderful, and I really want to watch it again, actually. I said that when the more recent film came out, Blair Witch.
Yeah.
I think that was 2015. I nearly went to see that, but ended up not doing, but I really wanted to just go back and watch the original. So, okay, so that's my first choice. Just to take us on to my second choice, I did mention that the Blair Witch Project, although it frightened the hell out of me, I was able to go back and watch it and enjoy it a few times. In a way, maybe because of the Blair Witch Project, on my experience with it, I don't expect that would be the case with every found footage movie. And that's why I'm actually afraid to watch that many of them, because I think some of them might just be only frightening and not do the other things about Blair Witch which I thought were charming and interesting. So that's why I've never seen Paranormal Activity, for instance. And what links to my next choice is that this is a movie which I've never seen again as well. I only saw it the once. So it is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. And I saw it just a few weeks or a couple of months after seeing The Blair Witch Project, because it was banned for a long time in Britain, wasn't it?
It was.
And I think the ban was lifted in 99 or 2000. And I saw it on its first transmission on Channel 4. With the same friends, actually, with whom I saw The Blair Witch Project. But, this time at someone's house. And we were all pretty disturbed. And I would like to use this example of the line I draw between the kind of horror that frightens me that I enjoy and that frightens me in a way that's not so enjoyable, hence why I've never watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre again. So, a well-done supernatural story I really enjoy being thrilled and terrified by, and I can go back to that, possibly because of the unreality of it. depending on one's own kind of spiritual beliefs and things, there's more of a buffer where you can think this story wouldn't really happen to me. On the other hand, there's a certain kind of horror where you are encouraged to empathise with people in a horrifying situation, and it's just harrowing, and it might be wonderfully made, but how often do you want to go back to that place and spend more time in that world? And hence the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I remember being utterly riveted and full of dread, kind of almost from the first frame. As I say, because I've never watched it again, I wouldn't say it's one of my favourite films or anything, but there's such an atmosphere of something's going to go terribly wrong. So a bunch of friends are on a road trip, I think, essentially, and they pick up an ominous hitchhiker, obviously in Texas, and even before the hitchhiker comes aboard, who's quite a disturbing individual, there's just something about the choice of details that they've chosen to show in the visuals of the van driving along. Like there's the shot that sticks in my head is where there is a dead anteater at the side of the road. There's just a sense of desolation and danger, and a sense that if something goes wrong here, you're in real trouble. And then this character comes aboard the minibus, who is just jittery and uncomfortable to be around, and the movie gets a huge amount of claustrophobic tension about the fact that these human characters, I was going to say, they're all humans, but these youth characters are kind of in vulnerable close proximity to this guy. And it's not that the young people are particularly likeable, as I remember they aren't. I don't really remember really liking anyone in this movie. But they're put in a situation that you just wouldn't wish on anyone. And the first situation is being stuck in this van with this guy who soon reveals a weapon, and I don't really want to go into it, but it soon reveals that he is as dangerous as you might suspect he is. And then later on, the situations they find themselves in get progressively worse and more entrapping, and also the number of young people is incrementally whittled down as the family. Do either of you remember what the family are called? Do they even have a name?
I should know. I feel like I should know.
But anyway, the villains in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as most people probably know, even if they haven't seen the film, are a family of kind of cannibalistic people, and they start
ex-slaughterhouse workers, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, that's it. And who kind of begin to entrap the youths one by one, and horrible scenes of torture and victimisation ensue.
Yay!
Which I don't really enjoy, but I do remember just being just riveted by, and I was really glad when the movie was over. And I was really impressed by how they'd been able to do what they did, because it's a very low budget movie. It's quite unconventional in a lot of ways, in the sense that I felt like the lack of a really likable kind of lead character or characters was deliberate. And I thought it was kind of impressive that the film was engaging and kept your attention despite that. And then aesthetic things like the use of kind of atonal music, as I remember that most of the music in the movie is not melodic or traditional horror movie music or movie music. Really, it's a lot of kind of dissonance, and music that kind of tells of psychosis and dread, which I found really effective. So I don't have a lot to say about it, but I do think that that's probably... I tried to think, what's a movie that I really just wanted to stop watching, couldn't? And I think it says something about this movie that I saw it in a friend's house on video. So I could have walked out the room or something, you know, or just stopped it, or just said, guys, enough. But I didn't. But I was really glad when we finally got to the end of it. And I've never watched any other film with Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the title. Although maybe I should. But yeah. Have either of you got anything to say about this particular movie?
I love it. Again.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, all the things that you said. There's a lot of screaming in it, so it's it's quite hard on the ears, I think. Texas Chainsaw. I guess I saw it around the same time because, like you said, it had been banned, and I remember that we got it on video. I think we rented it on video and we watched it in one of my first university houses, I think. So we were all eager to watch it, you know, watch the film that's been banned. What's it going to be like? And then we were all kind of, I think, possibly a little bit underwhelmed, but I think I liked it more when I studied it on my degree. And then in later years, when I've done more reading and research into serial killers and wrong-uns, and I've read about
Wrong-uns.
proper wrong-uns, read about Ed Gein,
Yeah.
who Leatherface is based on, and what Ed Gein was actually up to. So seeing the link between the actual real-life person and his, you know, skin suit and armchair with skin on and belts made of nipples and all that sort of stuff, the link between the real stuff and then what's in Texas Chainsaw, I think I liked it more after knowing the truth, as it were. Again, I'm doing air quotes, but nobody can see them, and the film. So yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. How about you, Kirsty?
Yeah, I've only seen it once, I have to say, and that was actually it wasn't sort of as soon as it came out. I think I probably saw it in the last 10 years, but I'm struggling to remember exactly when. Okay. And I think I watched it because, again, it was that kind of sense of, oh, this is a really iconic horror piece, and one, you know, it's referenced so often that one should see it. However, I've said, again, was sort of like Stella said, I felt a bit underwhelmed by it. I think sometimes when films come with that level, that, you know, that kind of aura and that reputation of being something
so
that
built up.
Yeah, exactly, that it actually you know, it kind of is slightly underwhelming. I felt the same thing about The Exorcist, actually.
Yeah,
but a lot of people did.
Yeah, but I think because it's to do with, isn't it, the way in which that, you know, something is responded to in its original context, and I'm sure in the, you know, in the 70s it was massively shocking, whereas in a, you know, kind of 21st century is less so. But I remember a couple of things about it. One is I remember being quite sort of surprised at how light the film was, how much colour. I mean, there's a lot of magic hour shooting, isn't there? And it's quite beautiful in terms of aesthetic, you know, the use of light.
It is certainly for a movie of that budget level. It is as well, yeah.
And then the other thing that really struck me, and I'm not sure if it's a kind of, I'm sure, Stella, you'll be able to kind of confirm about whether or not there's lots of kind of discussion around the male gaze and misogyny in the movie.
Yeah. Let me try and recall.
Yeah, no, I just remember kind of at some point I felt like I aligned a bit with Leatherface because I really wanted Sally to just shut up,
to stop screaming,
to stop screaming, and also, I don't know, put a bra on. It's a lot of the
70s.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a lot of the back of the
film
is her running around in, you know, a vest top and not much else, and screaming a lot. And I found that quite draining. And so there were times where I thought, just get her.
I think that the sympathy for Leatherface is quite interesting, and sort of sympathy for the whole family, because they've turned to cannibalism because they've got no money, they've got no way of life anymore. And in the second one, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, we see how Leatherface is, it's clearly mentally unwell, but how he's kind of bullied by his family, and he has an opportunity in the second movie to sexually assault a woman that he's got trapped, and he doesn't know what to do. And you can see the panic in his eyes that he doesn't know what to do with her now that he's got her. So there's a lot more sympathy towards him in the second movie, and I don't know, maybe I see more sympathy for them in the first movie, having seen the second movie, if that makes sense.
I think there's something quite pathetic, but in the true, kind of in a pathos sense of that kind of him at the end with his chainsaw, sort of, kind of bereft.
Waving it around.
Yeah. So
which isn't safe, is it? I mean, you don't wave a chainsaw above your head. You're not wearing a helmet, mate. Come on.
No.
Oh dear. Yeah, I know that. I've seen the Dawn of the Dead remake. Yeah. Remember how you don't want to slip with a chainsaw.
No, yeah. Or in the back of the van, yeah. It's a good bit, that bit. I like that bit.
Well, it's stayed with me. I'm sure we'll be discussing that when we come to talk about horror remakes.
Yeah.
So those are my two. Stella, I think you're up for your second
I'm back,
movie.
aren't I? Right then, okay. 28 Days Later. Now, so it's 2002. Is it 2002 or 2001? 2002.
Yeah.
Danny Boyle. When I was making notes on this morning, the first thing I've written at the top here is that it's scary and that it's really sad. And I think whenever I have watched it again, there's quite a few moments in it where it brings tears to my eyes because it's just so bleak and so sad. And so anyway, when I saw it when it first came out in 2002, went to the cinema to see it. Zombie films were kind of off my radar at that stage in my life. I don't really think I'd watched any. I might have watched Night of the Living Dead, but I don't recall it. Anyway, so I went to see 28 Days Later. You got the opening sequence in the lab where the angry monkeys are released, and everything goes wrong from there. And then it just slips back into the quiet, still, dead London, like London at dawn. They filmed all those moments at dawn, didn't they? So that it would be as quiet as possible. And it looks stunning. The colours are gorgeous, but it's that bloody score by John Murphy, that slow build of that first sequence where Jim's realising what's going on and he sees all the missing posters around London. I'm talking about it now, my eyes are filling up because it's just so bleak. And then the song builds and builds and gets faster and faster, and he meets Selena and Jim, and everybody's running, and the zombies are running, and Jim's running, and the petrol station's on fire, and it's just that build is so intense that in the cinema I was pinned to my seat. And then when we get to Jim's parents' house eventually, and he finds his parents and I don't know, is it a spoiler if I say what's happened to his parents?
Possibly. No, but
I think anything up to halfway through the film is probably okay.
All right. Well, Jim finds out that his parents have killed themselves and they're in bed, and he reads their suicide note, and their suicide note every single time I'm just like, that's so sad. And I've even memorised what it says. The suicide note says, "With endless love we left you sleeping, now we're sleeping with you." Because when all this kicks off, Jim's in a coma. Yeah. So I just find that so utterly heartbreaking that every time I watch it, and I have watched it lots and lots of times, every time I watch it I find it a really difficult watch. And anyway, the film cracks on, and there's more zombies, and there's more running around and more deaths. And I think the main reason that this film frightened me, apart from the absolutely terrifying running, vomiting blood, screaming zombies, is I think for me at the time it was the first time that I'd considered actual complete world collapse. And I was like, oh, that is terrifying, where there's nothing, there's no one there to help you, the government's buggered off, there is literally nothing there. And it was that premise that was, I found, that and its bleakness of there being hardly anyone left is what really got to me. And then it's all done on digital cameras. It's got a very indie movie feel to it, which I do quite like. And one of the most interesting aspects of it was Danny Boyle's sort of resistance to the word zombie with regards to the infected, as they keep being called, because he had quite a lot of trepidation over how they were going to market it, because from Boyle's point of view, it was like, well, zombies, are we really going to is that going to do it? Are people interested in that? Turns out they were, and there was the big zombie resurgence after that.
Sure.
So the creatures in it, they infected them all like the descendants of Romero's crazies, sort of like plague victim type things, which seems quite pertinent now if you look out your window.
Yep.
And then, at the time, not long after 9/11, and people were very, very twitchy about biological warfare, and also a bit like you were talking about with the Blair Witch Project and how it just fit with the first burst of internet and people chatting about things on the very, very early social medias. There was the SARS outbreak at the same time. So rather than movies, rather than you've been able to see what a movie is being frightened of, a decade or so later, with 28 Days Later, it was talking about the things that were happening now. So that was added to it being really, 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 really scary. And then in the sort of the final act of the film, the complete breakdown between the humans and the infected, and everybody just being completely savage at the end, is just brilliant. Yeah. And just to reiterate, John Murphy's bloody score, for God's sake. So before we switched on to record this podcast this afternoon, I was just testing myself. Am I still scared of this? And I popped it on Spotify, and it was running for about 30 seconds in my headphones, and I was like, no, I'm going to turn this off now, because I don't like it. And I was running downstairs going, no. And my husband's like, you okay? So I've just listened to a bit of 28 Days Later soundtrack, and he's like, why did you listen to that? You hate it, turn it off. Why are you doing that to yourself? So yeah, I love the film. I've watched it many times. I've got it on DVD. Might have written an essay about it at university, and it's frightening, and I just find it incredibly sad at the same time, and it makes me cry a little bit. Wow. So there we go.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I don't think I've got anything immediately that I could add to that. What do you think of that, Kirsty? I remember when we were at uni and this movie came out, we were talking about the sorry, I invited you to speak then, and now I've started speaking. But just to say, I remember us being. I didn't see the movie when it was out of the cinema, but I remember us all talking about it, both because of what the film was, but also because of the DV camera technique.
Yeah.
So that being very interesting to us as film students with low budget filmmaking ambitions.
Because the cinematographer was Anthony Dodd Mantle, who was the DP for Feston, which is the first Dogma film. I remember that I think he also did he was also DP on Slumdog Millionaire as well, and maybe Sunshine. But I think
Sunshine.
Sorry.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So I think that aesthetic, does it again, as you said, it does feel really sort of contemporary, and again we've got another film that sort of sits in this point where kind of filmmaking can be lower budget and can and so a consequence of that is actually something that feels fresh and exciting and actually much more relevant and taps into the real world in a much more kind of visceral and kind of voracious way. I mean, you were talking about the kind of notes as he's running around, sort of walking around London trying to sort of piece together what's happened, and I remember again, so it's 2002, isn't it, release? Yeah. So that sense of how that echoes the kind of 9/11 kind of aftermath is just really powerful, and I think I've
got goosebumps now.
Yeah. So I think particularly for, kind of people of our age, watching that film when it came out, and that being like really, really, kind of part of our, kind of, our context at that point in terms of kind of a global sense of kind of dread and big things shifting. Yeah. And I think it's a great film to look at as a kind of allegory, isn't it, for the kind of contemporary world and its problems. I mean, even if the virus is called Rage. Yeah. And the kind of there's an opening montage, isn't it, that we see that the chimp is being made to watch in the lab.
Strapped down, isn't it, with all the screens.
Just all this just kind of global chaos, and that's all kind of archive documentary stuff. So it's again, it's really plugged into that 2001 2002 kind of world. Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. It's much more powerful and more scary because of that connection to the real, rather than rather than that sense of it being kind of far away, like you were saying before with Texas Chainsaw Dan. And the other thing as well that strikes me as well with it is that the zombies, or whatever you want to call them, the infected, are, they seem like the big monster, don't they? In the first part of the film, that's the big threat that they've got to get away from. And what I really enjoyed about the film is the way that twists in the second half, and what you realise is actually, the enemy isn't, or the big threat isn't the infected, it's other people.
It's other people.
Yeah.
And done so well as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such good performances.
Yes, yeah.
Christopher Eccleston's performance is excellent in that film. He plays slightly unhinged.
Yeah, Major
guy.
West, isn't it? Yeah.
Very, very well. Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah.
Although, and so, I've said before, my husband's not into horror. He came to the cinema with me to watch that, and he did enjoy it. So there's the odd one,
right?
But if you remember it at the very, very start, when Jim's wandering around London and it's quiet apart from disco, and he touches a car and the car alarm goes off, and everyone in the cinema leapt about a foot off their chair. Husband's popcorns everywhere. It's great,
right.
great.
Wow. I'll just mention, I didn't see it at the cinema, as I said, but I did see 28 Weeks Later at the cinema, which I kind of rate. Obviously, I
like that one too.
I'm glad to hear that. I don't think it's the place to talk about it here, but I do remember the audience reaction being similarly visceral to that. That's one of the best examples of seeing a movie with an audience that I have. And I saw that movie on my own, and everybody was so into the film that we started talking to each other even though we didn't know each other.
Oh, that's nice.
It was like being on a roller coaster. Everybody's so scared that you're instantly bonded.
You're in it together.
Yeah. I do love the original, and I've been meaning for years to sit down, and I would really like to do a double bill of both of those movies, because I've still only seen it once, and I suppose maybe one of the reasons why I've not gone back to it is that I have kind of quite a long-standing love of end-of-the-world narratives.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much now. They don't seem as fun right now. So therefore, some of the things that it does, I was kind of already familiar with from other things. So therefore, I don't kind of uniquely associate with that movie, but I do would like to watch it again, because I'd forgotten how much heart there is in it until you said that, Stella. The thing that I remember being most moved by was what happens to the character played by Brendan Gleeson. No spoilers. It's, and also I think it's just a really important movie in the sense that before 28 Days Later, there hadn't been a lot of British horror movies for a long time. Yeah, true. There was a couple in the immediately preceding couple of years. But since then, because I think filmmakers have become hip to techniques of low-budget filmmaking, and also technology has made things much easier, there've been, loads, basically, far more than I have track of. And also it's got the great legacy of starting off Alex Garland as an original screenwriter, because I think before that he'd written The Beach, which was based on his novel, but he went from 28 Days Later to Sunshine, and then obviously to Dread and Ex Machina. Yeah,
and, I was actually reading something yesterday. Sorry, I was actually reading something yesterday, although I didn't kind of look too deeply into it because it's a plan that I have. That he directed parts of 28 Days Later.
Okay.
So and also Dread apparently as well. But again,
he definitely did on Dread. Yeah, that's a fact.
So he was, kind of developing those skills, kind of as well as being the writer, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might have been with Dread. There was some kind of severe problem between the cast and the director, and Garland had to pop in to mediate. But I think maybe on 28 Days Later, Danny Boyle just said to him, "Why don't you direct this bit? Why don't you direct this bit?" Maybe he did second unit. Because also Danny Boyle did direct bits of 28 Weeks Later, which is, mainly done by Juan Carlos Fresnadillo. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Maybe not, probably not. So yeah, there's interesting kind of threads of creativity running in through there. Does you might know this, Kirsty? If you don't, no worries. I didn't check if Dodd Mantle and Garland have continued to work together, because I know he shot Dread.
Yeah,
did he shoot
don't
Ex Machina?
Think so. No, I don't think so.
No. Okay, that's a shame, because he's an extraordinary talent as well.
Yes,
so.
yeah.
And Stella, are you familiar with the 1970s TV series called Survivors?
I've heard of it. It was on... I think I meant to watch it or read more about it during my early days of my PhD, but I don't think I got round to it.
It's great. I shall
Right.
have to point you in the direction of that.
Survivors.
In some ways, I think 28 Days Later is kind of a mixture between zombie movies and Survivors.
Right.
Because Survivors is an end of the world outbreak movie where there are no zombies. It's just everybody catches a cold and dies. It's
quite apt, isn't it?
So it's kind of less fun now. It used to be one of my favourite things because of how bleak it was.
What was the original channel?
BBC One.
Survivors.
Right. Yeah. So
I
think
on the
there's
list.
quite a lot of it on YouTube. So
Right. I'll have a look. Thanks.
No worries. Have fun. First episode's great. If nothing else, watch that. So, so I think we've just got one more movie to talk about now, Kirsty, and I think that's yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about The Descent from 2005, directed by Neil Marshall, which I think is his second film. First one was Dog Soldier. With Sean Pertwee.
Yep.
So The Descent... it's one of those films that I think, in terms of, I find it actually really hard to pick a second one. Like my first choice, Event Horizon, that was a no-brainer. But the second film was much harder, and it was more about thinking about kind of a film that I felt was really effective, sort of on its own terms, and creating the kind of response in me that I thought Neil Marshall was trying to create, if that makes sense. It's kind of been regarded as one of the greatest modern horrors, and it's kind of notable for a couple of different reasons. So it focuses around a group of kind of women in their mid to late 20s, early 30s, who are kind of deliberately kind of encoded in 2005 as being sort of slightly unusual, kind of adrenaline junkies. The film starts off with them white water rafting, and the main thrust of the film is them going kind of caving or spelunking, which is a great word, in America. So what's interesting about the film is it's not American, it is British. It's shot mainly in Britain, but it appears to be set in America and has a kind of international cast. So you can kind of clearly see producers and stuff going, right, okay, how do we make sure that this sells to a slightly wider audience? The protagonist is Sarah, who's a member of this group, who basically, in a very, very shocking kind of moment at the beginning of the film, loses her husband and her daughter. So we start off with this, horrendous tragedy, and then a woman sort of, kind of dealing with her grief or not dealing with her grief at the beginning of the film. So she is taken away by her group of kind of friends who all enjoy these, outdoor pursuits, into the middle of nowhere, into a cave system somewhere, in a forest in America. And once in the cave, the kind of expedition leader Juno, who is not what she appears, or kind of makes some quite careless decisions around the group and what they're going to do, and so they kind of increasingly find themselves in unexpected situations with some unexpected creatures underground. The film does a really, really good job, I think, of creating a really claustrophobic atmosphere.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of the lighting in the film, for example, is just purely kind of diegetic. It's the lights that the climbers or the kind of cavers have got with them as a group. So their flares and their hand lights and the torches on their helmets, rather than bringing in, kind of additional artificial lights. And that really, I think, is effective at putting us as a spectator in that position of with them in these very, very tight situations. It's got some really great jump scares and some, really great kind of use of sort of deep focus to sort of, show us something that the group haven't yet noticed. But I think, for me, a couple of things that really stand out about it, and one is, again, it's that kind of sense of, it's the kind of they're called the crawlers, or at least that's what kind of Neil Marshall calls them. These kind of cave dwelling creatures. Essentially, the idea is, he said, that they're like cave people who never evolved and kind of came out the caves. So they're kind of essentially kind of blind bat-like kind of humanoid creatures, but they're not actually, again, the kind of the main threat. That comes from somewhere much more familiar. And that I think there's an interesting reading in the film where you could sort of see them as being the group kind of going into this unfamiliar location and kind of being almost like colonizers. In that there's a moment later on in the film where our protagonist kind of dispatches a young crawler, and Neil Marshall spends some time just with the mother dealing with the grief, which is a really, really kind of interesting and sympathetic moment in the kind of in the film, I think, in that sense that they're, kind of the monsters they're just acting out of the need to survive, and that they have family relationships, and that by these women coming into this situation, essentially they're kind of upsetting that balance that exists within the kind of natural space. So yeah, it also kind of has that kind of night vision aesthetic that was really popular. Again, coming out of was it used in Blair Witch, Dan? I'm not sure. But certainly we kind of start to get, don't we?
I think some of it was.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Most Haunted and things like that.
Yeah, kind of green night vision stuff going on. So there's part of that in there. And again, as with Event Horizon, the ending, there's two different endings. There was the ending for the American audience, which is a little bit brighter.
Yeah.
And then the ending for the original ending, as Marshall intended it, for the UK audience, which is not.
Yeah.
Which is not. Yeah. So
I haven't seen the sequel, but I understand the sequel picks up from neither ending.
Oh, okay.
I understand it kind of retcons a different ending to go from.
Okay, I've not seen the sequel, so I can't speak about that.
No, me neither. So there is one. That's all we can say.
Yeah.
I want to say it was very nearly one of my choices, The Descent. I didn't see it at the cinema. I saw it a few years later on TV on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, as I remember.
Wow.
I
festive.
just chose to sit on my own and watch. Well, I do have a funny festive thing of thinking something very frightening is kind of appropriate. But, absolutely gripping as hell. And things in it that are frightening, that are kind of commonplace. Like, just obviously, I don't know, for me, I'm a little bit frightened of heights. So just the fact that it's about a bunch of people going spelunking is quite tense. And there are scenes in it where you've just got an actress hanging by one hand over a massive drop.
Yeah.
And the film and the performance really kind of emphasise the muscular pain of just holding on to that position. And it's gruelling. But also I think it functions as a great monster movie.
Yeah.
Because those monsters are so interestingly characterised and the combination of the design of the monsters and the use of night vision to show them both creates a number of great shock moments, but also it kind of means you never see enough of the creatures to lose your fascination with them, which I think can sometimes be a problem with movie monster. So, that's a great choice. Would you like to weigh in on The Descent, Stella?
No, I can't. I've not seen it.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope that stands as a good recommendation.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, it was because of what most of my usual problems is that my husband saw the trailer for it on telly, and I was like, "Oh, will we go and watch that?" And he was like, "Well, no, absolutely not." So I've just not seen it. And I do actually have it on DVD downstairs. I've got this box set of, I don't know, best horror films or something, and it's still in its plastic wrapper. So maybe I'll watch it on my own, because Owen's having none of that at all.
Right, fair enough.
But yeah, sounds great.
From my experience, I would say watching it on your own is possibly the best way to watch it, actually.
Right.
Yeah, at night. Choice, in the dark. In as dark an environment as you can make it, I would suggest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Feel like you're lost in a cave.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. Nice one.
Okay, I'll take a beta blocker first in case it's too much.
Right. Those are wonderful choices. That's great. That brings us to the end of our survey of our scariest movies. Very quickly, I'd just like to throw in a couple of honourable mentions. I'm not going to elaborate on them too much because we're running out of time. But other films that I also thought about including were El Orfanato, The Orphanage from 2008, J.A. Bayona's film, which is a terrifying example of the cinematic ghost story. The Woman in Black, the 1989 TV movie, which, because it's so associated with what frightened me when I was 8, I think we kind of covered that stuff with talking about Ghost Watch.
Yeah.
Have you guys got any other films you'd like to mention? That just briefly? Because I know we've all had trouble narrowing it down.
The only one that I would have stuck on the end is not a film, is the recent Netflix 2018 version of The Haunting of Hill House, and not necessarily the whole of The Haunting of Hill House, but the bent neck lady in particular. That was a definite.
Right.
I'm not getting up in the middle of the night for a wee situation after watching that. So
that's intriguing.
That's
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, I had two possible other ones. One was the Babadook, which we're going to be talking about in a future episode, and also kind of slightly controversially, is Roman Polanski's The Ninth Gate.
Oh,
okay.
Which I watched it on my own. Late at night, not expecting it to be what it was at all, and it properly creeped me out.
Right. I've seen it, and you make me want to watch it again. I think it might be on Amazon Prime or Netflix. I've seen it somewhere recently. So, okay, that's an interesting one. Right, nice one. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I think it's time to do our traditional recommendations for the week. And I'll go first if that's okay. And the reason I want to go first is because the listener will have to act fast to see my recommendation, which is Tremors. It's on the Horror Channel on Saturday, which is one day after this drops. So you've probably missed it, but if you haven't, it's on at 6:30, and it's a wonderful comedy horror monster movie with Kevin Bacon from 1989 that I've just seen loads of times and is absolutely wonderful and has some of the greatest monsters and also some of the greatest one-liners in recent movies, I think. So that's mine. How about you, Stella?
Well, because I'd been thinking about Haunting of Hill House as another suggestion, I was thinking of works by Mike Flanagan and his adaptation of Stephen King's Gerald's Game on Netflix. Just a great example of a horror film where it's just one person in a room and everything that happens to them. And while I'm not the biggest fan of King's books, I think Gerald's Game, the adaptation of that on Netflix, is really worth a watch. And the actress in that is also in Haunting of Hill House, so that's why I was thinking about that one as well. But it really does work as a film.
Okay, so that's intriguing. Yeah, I've been wanting to check that out. So I haven't seen anything by Flanagan yet. So he's got a whole body of work that I need to investigate. How about you, Kirsty?
So I'm actually not going to recommend a film or a television program. I'm going to redirect you towards Tanis. Yeah, podcast, which you can find via tannispodcast.com. It's also available, episodes are available on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts or any, of the big kind of podcast providers. Yeah. There's 5 seasons. It's very much kind of, investigative, serial-esque, but kind of Lovecraftian, cosmic horror, with lots of kind of interesting mythology and a deeply unsettling tone from the outset.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know about that at all until
me neither.
we did this episode, so thank you for that.
Okay.
And that's something I shall certainly love to check out. Wonderful. Right. Well, we've done some interesting group therapy there.
I feel the weight has been lifted.
Indeed.
Yes, I'll feel much more comfortable revisiting certain horrors. Whether I'll watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre again, but I might watch one of the sequels or remakes. We'll see. So next week we are going to be all three of us here again, and we're going to be discussing something close to your heart, Stella.
Yes.
Horror remakes.
Woohoo!
So
I'm excited about that.
Me too, and I've been encountering some interesting stuff in preparation for it, so it's going to be a good chat.
Yeah.
But for now, though, we're disappearing once again for another week. The listener will be able to find us here next week at the same time. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your company, Stella and Kirsty.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
See you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, Stella Gaynor, and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism, in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law, and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages, @AndNowPod or @LeeCushingPod. Follow us on Twitter, @AndNowPodcast or @LeeCushingPodcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now, the podcast stops.